Hey everyone, if you're interested in learning about a career as a dance educator, then please stay tuned for this episode. Hi, I'm Kiki.
And I'm Kemi.
And you're listening to
Your Advisors Will See You Now, a podcast that will help you to figure out all of your options for life after high school.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Advisors Will See You Now. We are back with a career chat. I feel like our main thing has been career chats lately, which is awesome because everyone needs a job and everyone needs to know about different careers. So we're really excited to bring you another episode so you can learn about the life of a dance educator. We have a great and a special guest with us today, Jenna Kosis. She's going to talk about primarily her career as a dance educator, but she's also a former professional ballerina. So that's going to be awesome as well. So we're excited to hear about this really awesome career from Jenna. I'm going to read her bio and then we'll get started. So Jenna Kosis is a dance educator and former professional ballet dancer with nearly 30 years of experience spanning performance, teaching, and leadership. She danced professionally with Richmond Ballet, Granite State Ballet, and Boston Dance Company while developing her skills as a teacher and mentor. After retiring from the stage, Jenna spent over a decade as a studio owner and artistic director of a pre-professional performance group, producing more than 3 full-scale productions each year and deepening her commitment to creating spaces where dancers of all backgrounds could grow in both technique and artistry. Jenna, thanks for being here with us. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. So I feel like with everything, Kemi and I could talk to you for a million years because you have a great background, just a really fun background. But we'll just get started with what your current career is. We'll get into the other part later, but what your current career is, how you got here, just some of your background story.
So currently I am both an educator in a local performing arts studio where I work with a youth group of children between the ages of probably about 8 is when they start coming to my class through high school. And then in addition to that, which is my community job, I run a virtual studio space for adults only, where my mission is to bring ballet to the adult community, both for those adults that never had the opportunity to dance previously, or those that are looking to return back to ballet as something later in life in a different life season. And part of that is to just make it accessible and affordable in today's world, because as adults, it can sometimes be hard to feed ourselves. And so my mission right now is to find a program where that can feed the adults. So that's my current kind of day job. But it took quite a road to get here. I've been teaching for quite some time, and I fell in love with just the entire process of dance from that very first beginning to working through. I love the fact that it's not an instant gratification game. It takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of building upon those building blocks. And in particular, I just love watching the students meet those milestones and the confidence that brings. And so those are my light bulb moments, and I love it. And so it keeps calling me. So I keep finding ways to work with students.
That's awesome. And what led you into dance initially? So were you dancing ever since you were younger? Was this something that you always wanted to do? What led you to officially start this track?
So that's really actually kind of a funny story. So I have been dancing ever since I was younger. I was very young, probably about 4 or 5, and I saw a PBS special where there was some sort of dance. I'm sure it was like a Dance in America episode, because those were played quite often back then. And I just turned to my mother and I said, I want to do that. That is what I want to do. And that's kind of how it started. We found a local studio, and it was by far not the best technical studio, but what they instilled was just a love of movement and a love of dance. And for me, I thought that was a really great start, because it wasn't classical ballet, even though that's where I sort of ended up falling in love with. But it was a blend. She was a modern teacher that knew ballet. And so her company was all modern. So I got a lot of different movement styles from a very young age. Not a lot of solid technique until middle school when we moved. And then I went into a more technical school at that point. But by that point, I'd already loved dancing. And I really, like I said, that was the process. I just loved the challenge of the next thing and that it wasn't competing with anyone outside of myself. So if I wanted that goal, I had to push myself to reach it. And so I just did the next thing and we tackled the next role and I tackled the next class. And it was just this process of bettering myself until I got to the end of high school. And the next thing was, if you wanted to continue, you either auditioned for a working job as a performing professional, or you went and did the college route and took classes and did the college degree. And I said, well, let's give the audition process a try and see what happens. And I was offered a contract with Richmond Ballet. And I said, okay, I guess that's my path. And so I sort of fell into the performing as a professional. That was never really my dream. It was more about that next bigger experience or that next challenge. And working with a company at that point was the next challenge. And that was just a wonderful experience. It kind of opened up my whole, it just opened my eyes to everything else that was out. And I'd already traveled to New York and studied for summers. And I had, done all of this other stuff along the way. But I just couldn't imagine myself going at that time to either just go back to school or go to a regular job, right? Like a 9 to 5 or what everybody was doing, working the retail, or I was like, that was just boring. And so I was able to take a pedagogy program along the way. And that's what launched my teaching career. So I was teaching simultaneously with performing because, performers don't make all of the rent money. So we all had different side jobs. And then, so that led me into the teaching career. And I managed to pull college in along the way. I did it very untraditionally along the way. So I ended up eventually getting a degree. But dance was always just that opportunity that was there for me. And I'm actually really thankful that I fell into it because I don't know that I would have done well going to the college. I don't know if I would have been as happy. There's wonderful college programs out there, but I think for me, it's been this path was a really good one.
I love that story too, because I feel as though Kiki and I talk about this all the time. There's just this constant rush that once you turn 18, people are like, go to college right away. And I like that you were able to listen to your instincts and you're like, well, I want to pursue this first. And then even later on, you went and you got your degree. It's okay where that is, wherever you complete that, right? So I really like that you shared that story because not a lot of people have that story. So it shows that it's okay. You will survive. Like if you do something.
No, I absolutely agree. We're actually, my son is a senior this year and we're feeling those same stressors. And, he has a parent that had a very untraditional higher education. And he's still like, well, I'm supposed to know. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we get to rewrite our stories as often as we want. So it's okay. I call them life seasons. We all have seasons and it's okay to try a new one out.
Absolutely. You mentioned, so along the way, you mentioned before your teaching career started, you did like a dance pedagogy class. So is that like a traditional pathway if you want to teach? Is that what is recommended? Or kind of what are the different ways that maybe someone, if they want to teach dance, like obviously you have to know dance, but like what are the recommendations, I guess, to prepare to be an educator in dance?
Which is a great question because there's a lot of conversation right now about that because traditionally it always fell to your principal dancers, right? Your dancers in the company just became teachers. And just because you can do dance doesn't necessarily mean you can teach dance, right? Just because you were the best dancer does not mean that you're the best teacher. a lot of it comes down to just personality and being able to break things down. I feel like sometimes people are just built to break things down and communicate that to others. So that was kind of where dance education started. And there's a lot of paths now. You can definitely go to college. There's some wonderful college programs that are giving those pedagogy classes, which is basically it breaks down how to teach dance to others, how to structure your class, how to build your curriculum, and how, what we would consider an appropriate way to introduce steps and movements that build on each other without injury. And you get a lot of other fabulous classes along the way in those programs. They're really, really wonderful. And it's been great watching them grow, because we have so many now that we didn't, 15, 20 years ago. So again, I everything in my world is a little untraditional. So I was able to take a pedagogy class from my mentor in high school. So in high school, I was in the St. Louis area. I danced with Ballet Conservatory in St. Louis, and I worked with a wonderful educator named Nathalie Levine. And during our high school experience, she would mentor you to teach class, and she would work with you on those kind of components on what you would want. And then you would be an assistant teacher, and then she would offer you to teach a class, and she'd give you feedback, and you wanted the feedback. It wasn't always wonderful feedback, but it was such a wonderful experience looking back on it. And so I was then able to pick up teaching hours once I had moved and I was working professionally. They all want professional dancers to teach their class, but I had that as my baseline. And so because I did college untraditionally, I did not actually look for a ballet degree as my degree. I have a degree in education, but it's not ballet specific. But I really do believe in personal development, like lifelong personal development. So I would seek out any additional master classes. I would talk with other teachers. I took several independent teacher programs. When I lived in New York, I would study with Finus Young and David Howard, and they would all have tidbits to share, and they would pass on some of that. And I think if you're open to it and you're receptive to it, that it's a great way to sort of get a multitude of experiences and kind of be able to integrate those into your own approach. Obviously, you don't come out with grades or a certificate necessarily. Some of the programs do, but they're specific to that particular program. And so it's a little bit more piecemeal that way than a nice wrapped up, BFA. But I felt like it was a richer experience for me, and I was able to network. And I have so many friends that are in the world dancing now, and we still regularly get together and we share notes and we talk about challenges. And I think the biggest thing you need to be open to is that the growing and the learning doesn't stop. That even if you've completed one program, you still find value in watching someone else teach or how someone else presents something. And particularly being in the arts, it's a collaborative process. So to not only share that amongst teachers, but then share that with others that are interested in coming along and doing that is super important too. So very long story to say, I have all these little pieces that have built on to that knowledge, not all classical ballet, but all pertaining to dance in some way.
Not just like listening to you, and it's just like a very unique experience. Like, you're a teacher. You said you have an education background now as well, but I'm just thinking like a math, someone who's proficient in math or proficient in English or just more of those other subjects, and you're and it's very, not saying that performing arts and dance is not structured, but those are very structured things. Like, you sit down, you have to learn like formulas and stick to those things. But with like your dance education, I'm just kind of hearing like people who maybe have different learning styles can maybe settle into this as a dance teacher, or I'm just thinking of other arts as well, because the creative aspect of it, you can just be yourself a little bit more. Now, there are creative people who can make math and science fun, but it's also very like rigid at the same time. But I'm just hearing, I like how you put it, just like you're building upon knowledge. It was very like practical learning. So I'm just thinking of somebody who's listening who's like, maybe you don't dance, maybe you're like really artistic, or you're really like musical, and you're like, how do I teach this? You can teach it in a way that you best learn. So, because there's somebody out there like you who needs to like build upon knowledge or do things practically and move their body to, to learn in a different way. So, I just thought that was really, was really great. It's not like a linear pathway. And actually, like Kemi mentioned to you, we interviewed another, she's a dancer, she's a singer. And she said the same thing. It's like not a linear pathway. It's just very, it's up, it's like a roller coaster kind of thing, but in a fun way.
It is, and I think really what you want to focus on is it's not linear. Sometimes we have to make it linear, right? When we're working with a student, we will have goals, and we will have those check boxes to say move a student from that beginning through the different levels of knowledge that they need to know. And that is more linear in what we're trying to achieve. But I think
Right.
the importance isn't so much that linear pathway as it is finding the right instructor, because the right instructor is going to be able to speak to your learning style and your qualities and be able to work with you. And I think that is one of the things that brings me back to dance over and over again, is that it isn't just a square box that everyone has to fit into. We have the ability to change our language to get it's very easy to differentiate through a classroom to meet all of those students' needs and meet their personal goals and kind of bring them up. I say it's easy. It's not. It's sometimes there's some challenging students, but we can achieve those things, I think, sometimes a little easier because we're not so linear in what we have to accomplish on a given task.
Mm-hmm.
And something for me that keeps on coming up is because speaking with the performer we interviewed, and then we interviewed a photographer, something that's really coming up for me in terms of like the arts is I think now in my mind, I would recommend the arts as another opportunity for something that could potentially be hands-on. I'm so used to saying hands-on work may be a trade, but now I'm really hearing a lot that there's a lot of practicalness that goes into the arts, where you have to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I also am hearing a lot of sometimes parents like, oh my gosh, like you're going to the arts, maybe it's not steady. But what I'm hearing with a lot of people that have this passion for the arts is they have like a lot of discipline, and it shines through because of the fact, I think everybody's so used to saying go to college because they think that's the formula. But what I'm hearing with a lot of creatives is they're finding the way to continue learning this discipline, because in the arts, like you said before, you keep on learning and you're making this path, and and that's in itself is such discipline, such like tenacity, that I think doesn't really get seen so much, which I think should be appreciated. So if I could go back in time, I would do something in the arts. But all that to say all that. But that was kind of popping up for me. And I think something too that might be beneficial for people that are thinking of maybe going into the arts field is saying what you said before, having a good instructor. So maybe having a mentor that can usher them along the way too, since it's not exactly a linear path, but they can give you some kind of guidance to say, okay, it sounds like you're interested in this, or how about here's some previous experience that I had, so this is another route that you could take too. So definitely a lot of nuggets here in learning for the arts and opportunities that I think parents will also get a little more relief listening to these episodes, because so often they're like, oh my goodness, they don't want you to do the arts, but there's options out there, and there's there's so many options out there. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think we tend to think of it as not as steady as an option, right? Like if we go to college and we get a medical degree, then we're going to get a job that makes X number of dollars, and that will have security, right? And I do recall having a conversation. I know my grandparents were not fans of going into the arts. Like, this was not, you were going to become, you should become a teacher because that's going to be a solid career, right? And that is what we tell. That's the messaging that kind of comes across. And in some ways, they're right. The steadiness of work is, particularly as a performer, the steadiness of work is always an up and down thing. I have a lot more stability in my teaching career than I did in my performing career. But even then, it's just like a teaching career. It's through the school year, unless they're doing a summer intensive. So your hours are off. Like, you're not always getting 9 to 5 work 52 weeks out of the year. So in that terms, like, you kind of have to just accept what that comes with it. But I feel like there's so much opportunity out there, not just in one genre, but to cross genres and work with other people. And I think sometimes the flexibility of having a job in the arts is what makes it possible. And if you pigeonhole yourself and you say, I am only going to do this kind of job, then you're sort of setting the box for yourself. But as long as you're open to participating in whatever art form, whether it's a performing art or a fine art, in any aspect of that, you're going to find a way to have a job related to your art in some way.
Could you also tell us a little bit about what it looked like when you were like dancing full time, and like what that kind of like a little light day-to-day looked like for you, what someone could anticipate? And then can you just tell us how you ended up pivoting to teaching dance?
Sure. So, when you get a performing contract as a professional artist, you usually have a contract that is for a specific number of weeks out of their season. So there's very few dance companies that can afford to offer a 52-week contract. That's like unheard of in the dance world. It's always very smaller. So you'd have a very specific number of weeks that you'd work, and it tells you exactly when those are going to be, and it will lay out how much you're going to get paid for the week. And then usually there's a shoe and or clothing allowance. So we would have a point shoe allowance, which means that this company would provide a set number of point shoes throughout the season. And if we needed more than that, we would have to purchase those. But that's sort of like one of the benefits that's usually attached. Not always many others, but you get point shoes. And sometimes there would be a clothing allowance too, like if there were specific tights or undergarments or things, those would be all spelled out too. But when you were working, you would arrive at the studio at 9:00 in the morning for company class. So everyone in the company would take class together for about an hour and a half. And then you would have rehearsals that would be planned out from the end of that company class through the end of the day, which was usually about 4:00. Because at 4:00, the studio would transition to the school portion, and all the students would come in, and they would need the rooms in the studio. So you could be called for a rehearsal at any point in time between the end of company class and 4:00. And so some days you would be in the studio from 9 in the morning until 4:00 in the afternoon. And some days you would have breaks here or there. It depends on what you were cast as. So generally, if you're cast in the core pieces, you would have big rehearsals for any large group pieces. The soloists and the principals would kind of pop in on their own little schedules. And generally, if you were a corps de ballet dancer, you would have the majority of the rehearsal you would be called for because you're with the background people.
I was like, what's a quarter?
A corps de ballet. So a corps de ballet is the large, like they would be the lowest level in the company. And they would be the dancers that did all of the large group pieces. So if you think of a ballet like Swan Lake, where they have bazillions of little white swans running around, that would be your corps de ballet. They would be all of the lowest level dancers. And those big scenes take a lot of time to set and work. Then your soloists would be anyone that would have like a little elevated position, a little, a special part, a small solo. And then your principals would be the headliners. They would be your Odette O'Deals. They would be the ones that did all the big partnering. They'd be your Sleeping Beauty. And so whatever your rehearsal would entail that day, you'd show up, you'd do your job, and then you would go home. In essence, go home for the evening. But none of us could afford to go home for the evening. We all went to our second jobs, which were a smattering of other things. And that was initially, what your day looks like. Some days are exhausting and some days are a little bit lighter. When you would have generally, in my experience, we would have about a 3-week window of rehearsals prior to any ballet. So you'd come in, there would be a full 3 weeks of rehearsals, and then the fourth week is what we called Tech Week, where we went into the theater. And that's where you had all of your rehearsals on the stage, and you had your lighting and your blocking and dress rehearsals before you opened the production. Tech Week would be a combination of being in the studio for a portion of the day and then leaving to go to the theater for the remainder of your rehearsal period. And so those would be longer work days. We still would start between 9 and 10 in the morning. And then we would usually have a dinner break before we went to the evening portion in the theater. And sometimes if we were in like a run might be 2 or 3 weekends long, we would be rehearsing the next show during the day and then go perform at night. So yeah, there's a lot of choreography that goes through your head. There's a lot of a lot of newness. And then your contract would spell out like when your breaks would be. Like generally Nutcracker would finish through the holidays and then you'd get some time off before they jump into the next production. So performing, and that was with my bigger companies. Now the smaller, more regional companies generally didn't have that same schedule, only because most of us were doing that as a side thing. So I did have several jobs with regional companies, and it would be a couple of evenings and during the week and maybe a Saturday, depending on what their budget was and how big the company was.
Wow.
So then you, it is physically demanding. Yeah.
Athletic for sure.
You get really good at working memory though, at remembering things, and there's this great connection, between seeing something and memorizing it, and then being able to physically reproduce it. I think it's a skill that you just kind of hone as you go along, and you just have to be willing to jump in and learn and pay attention. And most of us, when we had a break, we never left. We'd stay and we'd watch, and we'd kind of just soak in all of that. That it was free education at that point, right?
Absolutely.
And that's how I kind of transitioned over into teaching, was because I would leave the studio and I would go teach at a local school. I taught a lot of places. I would teach in the schools or be offered a position in the schools that I was working with. So I didn't even have to go very far. And once I realized that I could sort of piecemeal that all of those little part-time teaching gigs into full-time hours, that was really where I was like, this is where my heart is. I don't want any of this other hourly stuff. And so then every time I would move, you send out your resume to all of the schools in the area, and you can, you just see what you can get. And it takes a little bit of work to piece all of those jobs together into full-time hours. But when you were teaching full-time, so then I transitioned into teaching just full-time after I retired. So I taught and performed for quite a while. And then when I retired from actually performing, I was full-time teaching. And that looks like morning would be class planning, anything that you wanted to prepare, listening to music. You're forever listening for music between choreography projects and teaching. And then I usually would teach from about 4 p.m. till 9 p.m. 4 nights a week, and then all days on Saturday would be my teaching days. So yeah, it's second shift for sure when you're talking about working with youth. Incredible. Because it's after school.
Right. That's incredible. Yeah, I'm thinking that there's like only a few like sports that you can do lifelong. Like you can like keep dancing and teaching. Dance is for sure one. I grew up playing tennis, and like tennis players can still play. People play until like they're 90. You can dance till you're 90 and 100. Everyone has the ability to move. And I'm thinking like golf. They're like only a few, but all like very athletic things. I'm just listening. I'm like, this is incredible. I watched what's that show? Breaking Point. I think that's what it's called. Breaking Point.
Yeah.
And it just when it first came out like 10 years ago. And that's where I was really like, oh wow, dancing is like, I love to dance, and Kemi loves to dance too. Like we talk about our dance backgrounds or experience later, but that show, I was like, oh wow, these are like, this is their full-time job, but they're athletes. It's incredible. Like, answer to some of the most top tier athletes in the entire world. So it just like, it's like never ending, which is awesome.
And I feel like that's the double-edged sword, right? Like we
Yes.
want the illusion that it's easy, right? That's what we're supposed to, like, we're getting paid to say, this is super easy. You can all do this too. And so sometimes we do the art a disservice because it it is an incredible time commitment that these kids are putting in to even consider a performing career. And that is something to consider also. If you're going to have a performing career, the commitment from a young age, particularly in classical ballet. There are other dance styles that people come into their performing careers a little bit later in life, but in classical ballet, they are still very ageist. And because it's demanding on your body, it starts from a very young age. And so these kids are putting in, Olympic level, probably commitment to get themselves into a working job. But it doesn't have to be that. Like, you can just dance for the joy of it. You can just come take ballet because you just love moving and you want to learn a new skill. And I think that is, I think the connectivity between all of those other sports that you just mentioned are similar things. Like, those sports are really inclusive because people will do them just because they enjoy playing them.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical toll to play some of the other sports is what holds us back from having longevity in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could you share with us, kind of adding on to that, what are some of like the highlights of like being like professional dancer and studio owner, and like what are some of the challenges of both?
Yeah. I think there's probably two answers to that. So let's start with just as a professional performer at that level. Like, as a professional dancer, the highlight is that you get to immerse yourself in your art, for sure. Like, that is, you're getting paid to do something that you love to do anyway. So as much as it's demanding and it's hard, I don't think anybody goes into that career without actually truly loving that process. For me, the highlights were working with the different choreographers and getting to be able to do some of the different productions. And just being part of that experience at a professional level is really great. I mean, they're making these costumes to fit you. They're creating the sets around you, and that being part of that creative process that isn't just you're a small part of it, but it's this huge group of people working together to produce this thing is just really great. And I love the sense of family that a lot of the companies I worked for. I was actually reflecting on my work experience, and in the 90s when I started working, I somehow managed to work for companies that were completely female run. And I didn't realize that at the time. It was just, the connection with the company or who I was working for. And I really, looking back, I think that's a highlight too, that was an unintentional highlight on my part. But I was offered jobs and I was able to work with these companies that, shockingly, and it's shocking because even now, the number of female artistic directors to male artistic directors is very uneven. So to be able to say that it's still a male-dominated realm in terms of who's offered those types of positions. It's changing for the better, which is really nice to see. But back then, it was. I feel like it was a feat to be able to do that. So that's probably a highlight of my performing career too. The challenge is the unpredictability of being in that profession, because not only, again, things are changing for the better in today's world, but particularly back then, there was still this very high pressure to have a body image reflect a certain look and a certain desired. I was lucky none of the companies I worked for weighed in their dancers, but that was definitely a thing back in the 90s. You would get weighed in, and if you weighed too much, off to the dietitian you went to fix your quote unquote problems. And I'm so happy to see that is shifting a little bit. There definitely is still an idealistic dancer look, But we're tending to be a little bit healthier about it today, more so than we were years ago. And that is a downside, that you're playing this balance of holding a standard that is this visual standard and being athletic at the same time. The other unpredictability is the job market, because if you don't have enough weeks of work, you have to find something else. So that's probably the downside of a professional performing career. If I shift that into my teaching, the highlight is definitely working with my students. I love that whole process. I say I fell into it, but I don't know that I would have done anything else, because that's really, truly where I love the moments where they find success. I love the confidence that it brings them. Like, that is truly the highlight. And the downside is probably, honestly, the working hours, because when you're working with children, it is all after school. And so if you have a family, it does affect how you are going to parent. It affects how you're going to have time with your spouse or your partner. And so it does, you have to be open to that time on when the working hours are going to be. So that would probably be the largest downside.
Mm-hmm. You definitely touched on the skill set, the training that goes into becoming a professional dancer and a dance educator. I was just curious, specifically for like what you're doing now, if someone is listening, they're like, oh, I want to be a dance educator, and they want to have like a broad, clientele base or client base. What skills do you think are needed to teach? You said from 8 years old to high school, but you also teach adults. Like, what do you think some of the skill set is that's needed to teach like a wide age range, and I guess also skill level?
Well, first would be your understanding of just dance education in general. So you'd really need to understand how the technique and all of that builds upon itself, so you can take somebody from that beginning wherever they'd like to go on that journey, assumably as far as you can help them get. But I think you need to have the personality to be able to speak. If you're going to have a wide range of students, you need to be able to talk to those kindergartners and first graders and break something down and have patience, because my Lanta, those little cherubs are cute, but you need patience to work with those young children. But then conversely, you have to have patience with the adults too, because they have a totally different take on coming to dance education. So if you have a skill set that can kind of in youth, most of the time, they are working to get better, to go to the next class. And that is their goal, is to get as good as they can. If you want to transition into working with adults also, you have to just have a mindset shift, because most of the adults, while they do want to get better, they're doing it for themselves. It doesn't really, like, their progression can be much slower, and they're very happy with that as long as they're moving forward. So you have to shift how you approach the class. And part of that is the cognitive ability to understand what you're saying and to apply it to their bodies. So young children, I really truly believe they need in-person training. There are virtual options out there, but I really just personally don't believe that's the best interest of the kids, because they don't have body awareness yet. So they think that they are taking on corrections, or they're working whatever you're asking them to work, and they just don't feel it the same way. Whereas when we start to work with adults, we become a little bit more body aware. We know where we are in space. We can understand when I'm talking about a shoulder over a hip, we can make more minute corrections. So working in the virtual space, I found a lot of success with adults simply because it's accessible and they understand some of that body awareness that kids just haven't developmentally gotten to yet. And it will come. They're just not ready for it. So to reach that wide base, you've got to have your knowledge, you got to have your patience, and you have to be able to shift how you're presenting that information depending on that student and the level, and honestly, what their goals are. Because if I present it like they're going to go have a performing career and all they're interested in is getting to the end of the year performance, like those are totally different goals. So you have to just be aware of what the goals are and help them to get there.
You definitely made me flashback because I used to teach tiny tots and it was 3 to 4 years old. And I just got flashback of being exhausted. The tiny tots, I'm telling you, I will never forget. We'd be like 5 minutes in, Miss Kemi, I'm tired. I'm just so tired. Oh, they were like my little divas. I was like, oh my goodness. Like,
I know.
you're right. You have to have a lot of energy.
5 minutes is an hour. They're like, oh, we can't dance for an hour. Oh my goodness.
Man, they were fun, but man, it's definitely a difference in age too, of like how you're teaching, like you said before, and like pedagogy for sure. And I think it's so important, like you were also mentioning before, like taking pedagogy as well, because not everybody knows how to teach. I remember when I used to lead a dance team, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I had a mentor, shout out to Jane Welford. She had me take a pedagogy class in college. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this makes so much more sense. And I honestly think now I do much better with giving step-by-step directions. I always say my husband's great at saying abstract explanations, but I'm very good at doing step-by-step directions. I think that possibly comes from dance and trying to be like, okay, let me see where you're at, and then trying to communicate it effectively. So I agree. The pedagogy and the goals, for sure. I learned that in pedagogy too, is understanding like where are they trying to be at? Are they trying to be professionals, or are we just here to have movement? Are we here to, if they're tiny tots, like we're trying to understand some kind of range of motion. Like we're not here to be for an audition if they're like 3, you know. So I think that's so insightful and very helpful. And is there any other advice that you would give to anyone who's possibly a young adult considering pivoting, going into this career, or maybe there's an adult who may think of slightly trying to change and maybe trying to do some education in dance? Is there any advice that you would give them?
The biggest piece that I think I could give is find someone that's going to be able to further that education and give yourself some really solid training. Not just, and again, it's going to depend on where their goals are. If they want to go into some sort of education path where you're working with kids, partner your dance education with child development because they go hand in hand. You really want to make sure that what you're doing in the studio is developmentally appropriate with what they can handle. If you're going to go cross-train as much as you can, you know, take all of the yoga classes, it all has a place in what you're going to be able to present. And the more you can understand your body, really it's just about that education and finding it wherever you can. And if you have the ability to find somebody to mentor you, that is really, in the arts in particular, you're going to find somebody that's willing to work with you. Find somebody that's willing to help talk you through that and kind of help guide you if you can, because they're going to be a wealth of information. We all need a good mentor.
I have one final, this is my final question. And I was just thinking, I follow like so many people on Instagram and like YouTube that dance, and I've thankfully always been exposed to the arts, but it hasn't always been like accessible to everybody. And I'm just thinking like the students you get, like they come from, I'm sure, a variety of backgrounds, from your little kids to like your adults, but how have you seen just like the like art appreciation or dance appreciation change over the years, and especially with social media, because it's like all over social media these days? How have you seen that change, and like how has it changed people you teach and stuff too?
Yeah, well, I think that depends on where you are and how you're working. This social media aspect, particularly in like commercial dance or jazz or hip hop, a lot of those, and in those big hubs, so in New York City, in LA, you're seeing a lot of classes that are no longer just classes because they're recording. So people will show up to take class and you'll pay for a class, but then the choreographer will be like, oh, I'm going to just film this. And they'll choose dancers to be in their recording, to be on social media. And so it's almost evolved into you're going to pay to audition, but you have to take X number of classes to be able to be in the video. And then you're still not going to see any benefit from being in the video except exposure, right? And that's like the biggest, that's a whole nother topic. But so in some ways it's becoming very commercial. In others, it's becoming more accessible. It's becoming more of an opportunity for others to even understand what some of those jobs and opportunities are like. And I think most importantly, social media has brought the diversity of the arts more to the forefront. We are seeing it much more prevalently than we would have, 30 years ago on a stage. I love where the dance world is starting to go in just acceptance of bodies and natural colorings and hairstyles, and we're seeing much more inclusion than ever before, which I think is personally, this is my opinion, but I think it's more in line with what dance should be. If we're going for a line, we want a line that is a natural line that's going to highlight the dancer, because that's what it's all about. It's not uniformity at this point. And that's an evolution that has sort of happened in the dance world. And I do like that it's becoming more easily accessible. We're able to see things, we're able to deliver products and classes to a larger group of students and people than we would have if we were still in that brick and mortar age only. We still are seeing a lot of, there's things on social media that I watch and I go, as a dance educator, I'm cringing because I'm like, oof, that's not necessarily safe. And so I do feel like sometimes we're opening the door for some people to try things out that aren't necessarily going to get an educated opportunity, right? Social media allows us all to share our knowledge, whether it's backed or not. And which is wonderful. And again, you have to, it's like everything else out in the internet now, check it out, vet your sources and make sure that it's quality. But I like the fact that it's more accessible. I like the fact that we can talk about it more, that we can share it, and that it is becoming more inclusive, and that I can see programs from around the world and interact with people. And for that, I'm appreciative of the social media trend.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us to interview you today. I really feel as though this advice and the insight is just so beneficial in the space of dancing. And dancing has been around forever. And it's so interesting how we're just talking about how it looks different now, like through the internet lens and even like career-wise now. So I really think that our listeners are going to find this beneficial. And is there any way that people could, do you want to share your website, or do you have like an Instagram, or I'm not sure if you do that, we're talking about.
Unfortunately, I feel like social media is that ever present, whether we like it or not, it's here to stay for a little bit. Yeah, you can find me at www.genecosis.com. I share my virtual studio there. We have adult-only classes for all levels, but I specialize in beginners or returning dancers to the studio. And we have live classes and an on-demand membership for those that can't, because I do want to make it accessible. And I am on Instagram at Genecosis Dance, so you can find me there as well. I'm on most of the socials, but I'm not a social media guru, so you'll see me sharing things I love.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And to our listeners, make sure you go and check that out. And thank you all for listening to this episode today. If you are curious about other different careers, we touched on some other careers in the arts or even the trades, medical, all over. Please make sure you listen in to the rest of our episodes to get some more advice and guidance and understanding of what it is that these careers do and how to get in there. Please make sure to also follow us on our Instagram, our TikTok, our Facebook at Yasin Podcast, and we will see you in the next one.
See you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the latest episode of Your Advisors Will See You Now. Please make sure to follow us on all of our social media pages and check out our website. Take a look at the show notes below.
And please make sure to subscribe and share this podcast. Also, show us some love and please leave a 5-star review. Catch you next time.
See ya.